You want me to put that on my Tudor?
Is she having a Narc collapse? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. It has been brought to my attention that in certain quarters it's being suggested that Harry's wife is having a Narc collapse. I don't talk about such terms as a narcissist having a Narc collapse, but rather there is a fuel crisis and the issue of threats to control. As I've made abundantly clear to you, the narcissist, either consciously where aware or subconsciously where unaware, seeks four things: control, fuel, character traits, and residual benefits. And that is what is applicable and what drives the narcissist's behavior in relation to other people or the contemplation of interaction with other people. Nothing else. The prime aims. Not necessarily all four, but at least one, usually two: control and fuel. Those two aspects are the most important because the narcissist has been created to be hypervigilant to potential threats to control so that control is maintained and those threats are nullified. The narcissist needs fuel, the lifeblood of the narcissist, to ensure that the narcissist continues to survive and to thrive. Threats to control can manifest either through what is known as challenge fuel, for instance saying to the narcissist, "I hate you, you're a low-down arsehole, you're no good at your job, you're useless in bed." Your anger, your words, your flapping arms as you remonstrate with the narcissist, the look in your eyes, your facial expression, all of that's giving lots of lovely fuel to the narcissist, so that's all good. But your words are challenging the narcissist, so that's not good. Worse than that is where you wound the narcissist, which is where you don't respond in any shape or form to us. You don't answer the phone, you walk away from us, you don't react to what we've said, you ignore us in some shape or form. There is no fuel, and you wound us. This latter instance is very problematic to a narcissist, particularly where it keeps happening. The consequence of a challenge is such that the narcissist will then have to do something to reject that challenge, either directly, indirectly, or by utilizing withdrawal. And the narcissist always gets that control. No matter how many times the threat to control occurs, the narcissist will eventually get that control. They may try and do so again and again and again directly, and then ultimately are forced into retreat. But in their world, the narcissist gains that control. So, for instance, a narcissist goes round to see his girlfriend, knocks on the door, she doesn't answer, he's wounded. He knocks again, she doesn't answer, he's wounded. He knocks again, she doesn't answer, he's wounded. His fuel levels are dropping as a consequence of this repeated wounding and the fact that no fuel is being provided. Eventually his narcissism will tell him, "You didn't want to speak to her anyway, she's a see you next Tuesday." And therefore the narcissist walks away from the house. In his world, he now has the sensation of control and the wounding has stopped because he's no longer trying to interact with his girlfriend. Thus, the narcissist will always obtain that control. The fuel crisis occurs, and you can watch my video about that, invariably as a combination of repeated threats to control caused by wounding, not challenge fuel, but wounding, and the absence of alternative provision of fuel from different sources. It is rare and unusual. People think that Narc collapses where basically the narcissist loses their shit and either starts ranting and raving at you or perhaps drops to the floor sobbing, a la Harry's wife style, is a Narc collapse. It's not. The narcissist ranting and raving at you is the expression of ignited fury, of the heated variety, and is being done to provoke a response from you and bring you back under control. Collapsing to the floor in a heap of tears is simply a pity play, again designed to bring you back under control and to draw fuel from you. If you don't react to it and walk away, you will wound that narcissist further. But all they will then do is either come after you to try and get you under control, or they'll go and deal with somebody else, complaining about you, thus smearing you, enabling them to get an indirect control over you, and then they'll receive fuel from the other person that they're talking to. Therefore, there's been no collapse. There will be no collapse. The fact is, most narcissists find it comparatively easy to go and find fuel from elsewhere. They have other people in the fuel matrix. They can switch to secondary sources, tertiary sources. I would recommend that you read my book Pipelines and Understanding Changes to the Fuel Matrix, so that you understand how the narcissist will switch elsewhere. They may not be functioning at full power, so to speak, but they're nowhere near a narc collapse. Sustained and repeated threats to control drain the narcissist of fuel, but even then, the narcissist will ultimately beat a retreat, thus not only securing control through that retreat and stopping the wounding by no longer being exposed to it, and then finding somebody else, because there invariably is always somebody else. There is some sympathetic ear, some sucker, some arse licker that the narcissist can turn to receive fuel from. There's no doubt that Harry's wife has been facing a particularly challenging period in the course of this year. Britain remains a hostile place to her, with the result that she hasn't set foot in the United Kingdom for almost a year. She perceives the British people, the British press, as hostile to her. The royal family are not exactly welcoming her with open arms. And that is an intermittent problem, but not one that she's experiencing each and every moment. So, for instance, where somebody might make mention of King Charles, the fact that he is not being welcoming to her presents as a challenge. But she swiftly deals with it, probably by smearing him to Harry or whoever else is listening, and then receiving their fuel in return. The challenge appeared, the threat to control appeared, and she dealt with it. The fact that she is repeatedly laughed at and ridiculed amounts to threats to control, but remember, it's still providing her with fuel, because she's still being spoken about, she's still being written about. So she receives the fuel, thus there can be no fuel crisis. Yes, there is a threat to control, which she doesn't like, because it'll make her feel anxious, it'll make her angry, it'll ignite that fury. But once again, she will deal with that threat to control, usually indirectly or by staying in a position of withdrawal. Because as I've told you, the narcissist always gets the control that is craved in some shape or form, because our narcissism allows us to do that through a variety of different means, including the creation of an alternate reality, in effect. Accordingly, to suggest that she's having a narc collapse is entirely wide of the mark, because she'll still be getting lots of fuel. She's getting lots of fuel from people commenting about her, talking about her on documentaries, talking about her on news programs, writing about her in the press, the numerous videos about her that are made, including mine. All of this provides her with fuel, and we know that she keeps an eye on social media and mainstream media, so she'll be receiving the fuel. She'll also, of course, be receiving fuel in her private life. She gets fuel from her children, from Harry, from perhaps a secondary source that she's courting if she's messing around behind Harry's back. She receives fuel from those non-intimate secondary source paid friends, from her mother, Doria, from the staff, from somebody waving at her when she walks down the street. Harry's wife is not locked in a concrete bunker, underground chained to a radiator, seeing nobody for hours on end. That would precipitate a fuel crisis. But she is able not only to physically interact with people, but to deal with people through the telephone, through Zoom, through text message. And thus, she will remain well-fueled. The problem that she has is that she's in the downward spiral in terms of her popularity tanking, people repeatedly taking the piss out of her. And thus, she'll be experiencing daily threats to control on a scale greater than that which she has experienced before. That will be amounting to a drain on her fuel levels where it's wounding, not challenge fuel, where it's wounding. And therefore, she is not at the point of Narc collapse, not at all. But rather, what she's facing is perhaps better described as she's not running at full power. There's still plenty of fuel for her. In fact, little has changed in that regard. But what she has now are more and more threats to control, and therefore her narcissism is spending more time smearing and diverting and withdrawing in order to address those threats to control. And where she's wounded, for example, she's a failure to be invited to something, a failure to be acknowledged, that drains her fuel level, meaning that she may well be feeling more tired, more stressed, more anxious than she has in the past. But she is not at the point of a Narc collapse, or, better described, as a fuel crisis. She is not at that point. For her to essentially have that fuel crisis and a collapse, she would need to be starved of fuel or receive such massive wounding that it punctures her to such a degree that the fuel is drained away and there's no replacement thereafter. This potentially can happen, but for someone as prominent as her, it's less likely, because there's always invariably going to be people and groups and someone that she can turn to draw that fuel from. Thus, matters are certainly problematic for Harry's wife at the moment. The residual benefit of money is posing a problem. She repeatedly has threats to control. There's no doubt about that. Life is not easy for her. But she gets that control, even though after a period of anxiety and stress, and she continues to be fueled. Therefore, paraphrasing, that reports of her Narc collapse are grossly exaggerated. What's really happening is she's having more of a torrid time in terms of the repeated threats to control that she's experiencing through her unpopularity and the repeated adverse reports about her and being turned down for things, which means that she's getting threats to control through challenge fuel and also wounding, which is creating anxiety and stress and nervousness for her. Life is not good for her, but nor is she at the point of collapse. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.